So, good evening, friends. This is the first of a series of 5 Adrian Snell blogs, video blogs, about the writing and recording of the original and the new Alpha and Omega. And this comes in response to quite a few people who've wanted to know more about the journey, what led to the writing in the first place, why we've made a new edition. Some of you will have been part of that journey, literally, part of the choirs, some of the musicians maybe who played on one of the actually hundreds of concerts that we performed all over Europe and further afield. But I wanted to start by just going back to the very beginning and giving you a sense of where we were in history, because actually the 1980s saw unprecedented changes to the history, particularly of Europe. And I was caught up in that, as were many of you. So I'm going to start at the very beginning, and this first blog will take us up to the beginning of the writing of the work. So I want to give you some background to where I was in heart and mind and spirit at that time. Firstly, I had very recently recorded in 1984 the album Feed the Hungry Heart. Some of you, I hope, will remember that album. If you do know that album, I hope you'll remember that the last track on Feed the Hungry Heart was the original Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. That song was written as part of the series of songs in that album without any realization at that point that it would become kind of central to this work that was going to be written some years later. So Alpha and Omega as a song and as a sense of thinking about the coming of the new kingdom was already very much in my heart and mind in 1984 and expressed in that song on that album. In 1984, of course, the European Union finished at West Berlin. There was the Berlin Wall, there was the Iron Curtain, as we called it, and Eastern Europe was a very different part of the world than it is today. Relatively recently, again, all of this was going to be caught up in the writing and recording of this work. But at that point, if you travelled further east from Berlin, you'd have all sorts of difficulties, and it would take quite some persuading of the authorities to let you through. So that was the world I was in. Personally speaking, I was doing a lot of thinking, a lot of reading. I think as a Christian, I had felt for some time the burden of understanding more about the history of Europe, not just the history of Europe, but also the history of God and his children, the whole question of God in history to make sense of where we are now was becoming increasingly important to me. So a lot of the reading I was doing centered around that. There was one particular book that was of enormous importance to me. In fact, I would now describe it as life-changing. It was called The Day Comes, and it was written by the author, the theologian, Clifford Hill. Sorry, momentarily forgot. And this extraordinary document, really, this book, was seeking to express just the kind of world we were living in at that time, the 20th century effectively, and the story within the 20th century of worldwide conflict on an unprecedented scale, which had led to such fraction, such division, such suffering, and such appalling statistics in terms of the death of men, women, and children. Now, part of that 20th century history, of course, was the Holocaust. And let's just remind ourselves, as if we need reminding, we're talking here about 6 million men, women, and children who were murdered in the death camps, the concentration camps of Europe. And here's the other part of that statistic that is perhaps most horrifying of all, and that is that of that 6 million, 1.5 million were children under the age of 15. So I was, if you like, embracing these facts, but they were going way beyond just facts to me. I was beginning to want to step into that world and understand more about what had led to this. How could men and women inflict this kind of suffering on each other, this kind of abuse of human life? I remember being drawn to God's words to Cain in the book of Genesis after he'd murdered his brother Abel, when he says, "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." And this really hit me between the spiritual eyes, because it occurred to me that because God sees what we don't see, the blood of the innocent continues to cry out to him from the ground. And here I was, touring in countries where there had been the most appalling bloodshed in the 20th century. And without wishing to sound too sort of dramatic or apocalyptic, it was that realization that the blood of the innocent was still calling out to God as creator, but also God as judge. So I was beginning to think in these terms, and I didn't know where it was going to take me. But here I was reading Clifford Hill's book, and then astonishingly, I receive a phone call from Clifford Hill. And he knew of my work, he knew of my music, and he approached me with this amazing request and invitation. He said, I am organizing a very special conference in Jerusalem, Israel, to be held in 1986. And the purpose of this conference is for men and women from all over the world with a prophetic ministry, men and women whose calling is to seek God's heart over his world. What is he saying? First to the church about the times in which we live, and then through the church to the rest of society. Surely he has something to say to us that's relevant to where we are right now, particularly in the light of the last, 86 years of this century, of the last century. And he said, and I would like you to write a work. I'd like you to compose something that will express this outpouring of the heart of God as part of the conference in Jerusalem, as part of the, if you like, the call to the nations. Would you be willing to do this? And I was probably unusually silent for a while. And then I remember saying, I can't think of a greater privilege than to do this. Let's meet up and let's start to talk about the shape of this one. Who will be there? How would we do it, etc. And so it was that I knew in 1984 or 1985 that this work was going to come. I didn't know its shape, but I realized straight away that there was maybe something in the fact that I had recorded the song Alpha and Omega on Feed the Hungry Heart, that there must be some connection here towards what was about to come. And so it was that there I am touring in Germany, and I'm about to step into a place that was to change aspects of my life, my spiritual life, my actual life forever. And I'm going to tell you about that in the next blog in about 7 days' time. Thank you so much for listening to this. Look forward to talking to you again soon.